In June 1940, Winston Churchill made this grim prediction.
I expect that the Battle of Britain is about to begin. Upon this battle depends the survival of Christian civilization. Upon it depends our own British life and the long continuity of our institutions and our empire.
It would become the most decisive battle in British history, and this is the story of how it was won. In this series, 4 young pilots have competed for the chance to go through the very same period of training that a Spitfire pilot might have had during the Battle of Britain, 1940. After 2 weeks, it was Dave Mallon from Manchester who came through, thanks to the natural feel for the aircraft that gave him the edge over more experienced pilots. His prize is 9 hours combat training in this real World War II Spitfire. Owned by pilot Carolyn Grace, it was built as a single-seater fighter in 1944, flying over 170 combat missions, from D-Day right to the end of the war. In the late 40s, it was converted into a 2-seater trainer. As Dave goes through the final stages of his training, this program tells the story of the day that was to help settle the outcome of the battle, September 15th. But also the horrific price paid by so many pilots in helping win the Battle of Britain. Dave embarked on his training by flying the same aircraft as his 1940 predecessors would have done, the Tiger Moth. He then graduated to the Spitfire, where pilot Carolyn Grace instructed him in the basics, straight and level flight, tight turns, and how to recover from engine failure.
Do you have control? I have control. You have control.
With all this under his belt, Dave moved on to navigation, flying all the way to the south coast across the skies where Battle of Britain fighting was at its most intense. Then came close formation flying, learning the art of being a wingman. Dave will now move on to the advanced flying a Spitfire ace would have needed. His instructor will be Peter Kinsey, a world-class aerobatics expert and the pilot in charge of the Imperial War Museum's historic flying collection. Few people know more about flying the Spitfire than he does.
Aerobatic flying is quite important if you're going to be a fighter pilot in combat. You are going to be flying the aeroplane quite close to its limits of high speed and low speed. You're going to be flying in very unusual attitudes, upside down one moment, in negative G one moment, hanging from the straps, the next minute being squashed into your seat. Aerobatic flying gets you used to that kind of thing, and you'd have to be thinking very fast. So it's a good experience to get you into the kind of manoeuvring you'd be doing in combat.
Had Dave been flying in September 1940, he would have needed all these skills and more. The Battle of Britain was entering its final and deadliest phase. Through August, the Luftwaffe had been concentrating its fire on fighter command, bombing its airfields and shooting down its planes. The RAF was managing to hang on, just, but relentless attacks were taking a terrible toll in lives and in morale. It wasn't clear how much longer they could last. Outdated British tactics had meant grievous losses, especially among replacement pilots who had no experience of modern dogfighting. They had been decimated. But on September the 7th, the whole face of the battle changed. Instead of pressing home their attacks on the RAF's beleaguered infrastructure, the Germans switched their attention to London. It was a monumental mistake. It unleashed terrible suffering on the city's population, but offered the RAF a vital moment of respite from their daily battering. It let them draw breath, regroup, and rethink their tactics. The Luftwaffe had another problem: time. It was running out. Hitler had given them till the middle of September to convince him it was safe to invade Britain. So Goering drew up plans for waves of massive attacks scheduled for September the 15th. This would be the day the RAF would finally be destroyed, clearing the way for the invasion barges. The 15th of September was to be Goering's day of destiny. At around 8 a.m, Keith Park, commander of 11 Group, responsible for the defence of the southeast of Britain, arrived at his base deep beneath the ground at Uxbridge. This was his centre of operations, from which he coordinated his squadrons. The German plan was for two major operations, one in the morning and then an even larger one in the afternoon, designed to catch the RAF recuperating from the first one. As Park was arriving at his control room, German bombers were already preparing to take off from their French bases, as German bomber pilot Ernie Wedding recalls.
And that was the biggest onslaught Luftwaffe delivered to the RAF. And as it so happened, I had to fly to North Field. And it was the first time that I did a low-level attack on an airfield.
As if he wasn't under enough pressure, Park looked up at 11 o'clock to see a very important guest arriving, Winston Churchill, taking a grandstand seat for the day's unfolding events. Four minutes later, the radar stations picked up the first of the incoming raiders. Their bearings, numbers and altitude were recorded by the teams of plotters armed with their croupier sticks. At 11:15, Park was still undecided whether this was a genuine raid or simply a diversion designed to lure him into scrambling too many planes too early. It took Park 10 minutes to satisfy himself this wasn't a fake raid, and he immediately scrambled his first squadrons. The Germans were putting all their faith in the power of their numbers to overwhelm Fighter Command. But they had a shock waiting for them. The RAF had some pretty big numbers of their own, and at 11:25, they were unleashed. 5 squadrons of Hurricanes and Spitfires took off from their bases north of London and joined up into one mass formation. This was the so-called Big Wing, a strategy that broke with RAF custom by making squadrons fight together, not separately. It took time to assemble so large a group of planes, but today the RAF was lucky. Unexpected headwinds had slowed a squadron of incoming German bombers by over an hour, at a stroke overcoming the strategy's major disadvantage, the time it took to implement. At around 10 to noon, the two formations met head-on, over 50 Hurricanes and Spitfires attacking all at once, picking up where the Hurricanes of 256 Squadron had just left off.
It says here I shot down a Ju-88 and also shot down Dornier 17. Dornier 17 became a nuisance because he put a lot of bullet holes in his gunner